Over the last few years, we had been studying various texts of the Upanishads in the Sunday classes while pursuing the study of the synthesis of yoga on Fridays, and we completed our study of Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad last time that we met. In looking forward to what to take up next, we had many options, including a deeper study of Sri Aurobindo's commentaries on the Vedas and focusing on certain aspects or deities, which would be fascinating and important. But in making a choice, I settled on the last 6 chapters of the Life Divine. And I want to put this in context. We are at a time of such large, unprecedented changes in the world, where the balance between the spiritual evolutionary breakthrough and the possibility of regression and collapse of civilization is on the edge. Every day counts, every effort counts, and it is in order to assist this breakthrough that the Avatar came and is working today, still behind the appearances. Sri Aurobindo gave this lavish spread of revelation of knowledge and deep spiritual experience as his gift to assist this movement on the more surface parts of our being. But we do not have enough time even to study all of Sri Aurobindo's texts, to go in depth to master them the way he lived them, is the work of many lifetimes. And we need necessarily have to focus on some things in urgency for the purpose of our evolution, even as we dwell on others at leisure for the purpose of our personal growth or satisfaction. In describing the text of the Life Divine, the Mother once, on many occasions in fact, recommended that instead of reading the whole of the text, which is essential for the full development of the mind and the mind's understanding of things, for those who do not feel aligned to that, to read the last 6 chapters, which dwell on the specific form and process of the integral yoga and the immediate next movement of human evolution. And so it is this which I wish to take up on the Sunday studies, but because the text is also much longer, more detailed and complex, I propose that we extend the duration of the Sunday classes by another half hour, so that we start at 6 o'clock and complete as usual at 7:30. And so from next Sunday we will be beginning at 6 p.m. The text itself of the last 6 chapters, you will see, follows a certain framework where the first of these 6 is called Man and Evolution, where Sri Aurobindo describes the essential evolutionary processes and principles and how they operate in the human evolution, how they have operated, how they are working today, but specifically what form or what role they play in the next step of human evolution. The next chapter is titled The Evolution of the Spiritual Man, which then enters the proper process of the spiritual evolution itself. And then in the next chapter, the triple transformation, we come to the specifics of the transformation of consciousness and of nature. And the next chapter is the ascent towards supermind, which shows this transformative process now lifted to the supramental working, which is, the immediate focus of our evolution. And the next chapter, the Gnostic Being, describes that consciousness in which this next step of evolution lives and how it operates in its collective, in the development of spiritual communities, and the difficulties that it will face in these workings. And finally, the divine life, which culminates this discussion. And so before we begin man and evolution and the evolution, there is a remnant of the previous chapter which I wish to take up. And the previous chapter was titled Rebirth and Other Worlds, Karma, the Soul, and Immortality, where he has dwelt on many aspects of the karmic process, the soul's evolution. But this last portion is immortality, which I want to begin with. And so we are actually beginning with the last portion of the previous chapter before we take up the proper 6 chapters of our focus. And the reason for this is that this last portion places our current effort in context. Our current effort is limited on 2 fronts. The first is a lack of clarity of the nature of the effort. We are not conscious even of things happening within us, and so even to redirect, modify, or intensify them is not so accessible, and the clarity is something which grows as we proceed. But the second problem is one of time. We do not have enough time in a human lifetime to be able to take it through all the way that is intended across these chapters. The mother made these observations that for the purpose of taking the transformation of consciousness all the way to its completion into a physical transformation, one lifetime is not enough. There is a need to extend this duration, which can be done, of course, in 2 ways. The first of which she has hinted at, and which will perhaps become more obvious in the coming few years or decades, that human lifespan itself could be extended somehow. The knowledge for this, the means, has been explored in past traditions, is being explored today again in many ways through the newfound knowledge of genetics and the understanding of the deeper working of the cellular consciousness from a technological or physical perspective. And these also will participate in the work. But the key will still be the ability to extend effectively your personality and consciousness and knowledge across several physical lives. And it is to this that the mother points. She says the most urgent requirement is to be able to develop this power of awareness such that even as we shed this physical body and take on another, we are able to continue in the personality, so that the work that is done does not need to be restarted, and the time wasted in the first 20 years simply to become aware as an organized individual, followed by another 20 years to amplify and develop your powers of nature, all of those can be enormously reduced, and the work itself continued into the next as early as possible. And in this way, perhaps in 3 or 4 lifetimes, Mother suggests, it should be possible to complete this work. Now this suggestion Sri Aurobindo develops upon in this part of the chapter, which is in fact the last few paragraphs. It first begins by examining the right relationship between we as a soul in evolution and we as the personality with which we are most obviously associated, that the soul itself survives the transition of death and rebirth. It is that which is in fact taking the journey. But what happens to the rest of the personality? What of that, if any, is carried forward, and what can be done to include more of that into the carry forward process? So this is the portion which I want to dwell upon, and it will probably take a few days of study before we move to the proper last 6 chapters of the Life Divine. He has just discussed earlier in this chapter on rebirth and other worlds the common misunderstanding of karma as a process of reward and punishment, and he dismisses that, shows its larger universal framework. And he comes now to this question of the relationship of who it is that is making the transition and its relationship with the personality. This brings us to another element of the ordinary conception of rebirth, which is not acceptable, since it is an obvious error of the physical mind. The idea of the soul itself as a limited personality which survives unchanged from one birth to another. And this is a wrong idea, that the soul is this I personality with this particular way of thinking and feeling, habits, and so the next birth should be a replica of this. And this is wrong, and it comes from the physical mind which sees this as all in our individuality. He explains, this too simple and superficial idea of the soul and personality is born of the physical mind's inability to look beyond its own apparent self-formation in this single existence. So because I think this is all I am, so this is all that can survive, I, as the surface mind, looking at my body as the personality, am unable to see deeper to other layers which are more essentially me. In its conception, what returns in the incarnation, what returns in the reincarnation, must be not only the same spiritual being, the same psychic entity, but the same formation of nature that inhabited the body of the last birth. We had an example here in the ashram where a group had gone for a picnic and there was an accident. They had gone swimming in some pool. One of the children drowned, and the mother of that child was distraught, and when the mother consoled her, this young woman insisted that she wanted to have exactly the same soul take birth again within her body as her next child. And the mother explained to her that things don't work that way, and it would not even be fair to the soul to impose this. But the woman was inconsolable. She insisted, and the mother graciously gave in to that demand and did what was necessary. Another child was born to this woman, and interestingly, the physical body of the child had a deep dent in the center of the chest where the sternum is, as if the whole chest had been compressed inward, most likely from the immediate impact in the subtle body of the last life's drowning struggle. And this was obvious, and it stayed into his adult formation of the body. But what would have been for sure a disappointment for the mother is that, well, the person does not have the same personality. You can't call it by the same name and expect the same kind of response and the same relationship. It's a different personality, even if it's the same soul. The idea that it should be the same personality which comes now is coming from this most superficial part of our mind, which sees that as part of the soul. And then he says, separate from that, the spiritual being, the psychic entity, and same formation of nature. These are 3 layers which he is referring to. The body changes. So in the new birth, the body changes. The circumstances are different. But the form of the being, the mind, the character, the disposition, temperament, tendencies are the same. That's the idea that it should be. John Smith in his new life is the same John Smith that he was in his last avatar. At least that's the expectation. But if that were so, there would be no spiritual utility or meaning at all in rebirth. Then you might as well continue in the same body. Why shed and replace? For there would be the repetition of the same little personality, the same small mental and vital formation to the end of time. And imagine how difficult it would be if in a personality, in a particular life, the personality has acquired a warped tendency, some distortion, some perversion, which it is unable to get free of. Well, you are as if bound to it across lives, which would be pointless. Towards the full stature of its reality, not only a new experience, but a new personality is indispensable. If you want that growth, you have to have a new personality. Because the spectrum of life possibilities is so large. A single personality can only explore one facet of it in a single lifetime. In order to be able to explore other facets, which this personality is not capable of, you have to have a different personality. If in one life, this soul chooses to explore the experience of transactional relationships, finances, and a wide, rich, complex networking personality, it cannot experience the life of isolation and one-pointed focus separate from the large mix and entanglement in human life. It cannot explore a life which is dedicated to self-sacrifice to a greater ideal. It cannot explore anything which is fundamentally different from this complex which binds the personality and makes it unable now to do those other things. And so it has then to take birth with a new personality now, more pensive, more introspective, less engaging perhaps outwardly, more indrawn as it explores deeper possibilities and experiences. At that point, it finds it difficult now to engage with other people to build complex and lasting relationships, because the temperament is totally different and the line of development is different. And therefore you recognize the need for personalities which need to be tried out in different types, formations across lives to build over time a broad enough spectrum of experience that the full lessons of the richness of life can be absorbed and even over time integrated, taking place across lives again for the purpose of integration. A personality is only capable of a limited experience of the infinity of what life offers. So, for the growth of the embodied being towards the full stature of its reality, not only a new experience but a new personality is indispensable. To repeat the same personality would only be helpful if something had been incomplete in its formation of its experience, which needed to be worked out in the same cadre of self, in the same building of mind, and with the same formed capacity of energy. Now he's pointing to three different facets of the personality, which are each quite distinct from each other. And of course, all three can be replicated from one life to the next, but more likely, one which is unfinished would be replicated and the others would be modified. But let's look at these three. First, the same cadre of self. What is the framework in which you identify yourself to be this personality? So cadre is like a border, an outline which frames the space in which you're going to operate. A room, for example, cuts out a section from the larger house. And so you limit yourself to that which is the framework within which you're going to operate. Now, what that means, I'll share here a personal experience because it was something so vivid, and most of us would have had at some time or other something similar. I recall at the age of about 5, which is often the time when the brain is just enough developed that the inner being can put forward a strong influence on the surface personality. I remember at the age of 5 one day, suddenly something emerging from within and looking forward to the future of the whole of life, this life. And then it as if imposed upon the whole personality, what I can best describe as blinkers to a horse. A frame, and it was it, this. To which I can give words now, but at that point it was just a fixed frame of life, and I can only translate in words at that time was here, the ashram, this space, this is it. And it was very clear from that point on, in the whole personality there was some kind of a limitation imposed that even the thought would not conceive of living elsewhere. The thought could not conceive of a life which should be different from this. And it was as if the carder was set. Much later, as the personality came into its own, developed a more stable base, that frame had to be removed so that it can actually widen its perspective and embrace other facets. But the base being set, this could be done, and that would be around the age of 30 almost. Now, I give this as an example. Most people have it in different ways. Sometimes one may not remember how that imprint comes forward. It may not come forward so dramatically. It may just be quietly placed. But some setting is there which is a choice of the inner being and which sets the frame of this lifetime and the line and direction of the development intended. So this is the first phrase he has used, the same carder of self. And then in the same building of mind, what's the imprint of your mind's formation? I gave earlier the example of an introspective mind versus an extroverted mind, or a mind which is curious to know and learn and develop a line of knowledge, or a mind which is turned to practical application and creation, would be completely different. And we can see how there could be for the soul a deep necessity of switching between these two in order to develop a specialization of capacity and then later work to integrate these two, and that would be a separate lifetime in itself. The way the mind thinks is so different between all of us. Look at cultures and the values that they bring about in the turn of the mind, and we get an idea of how diverse it can be. There are cultures which from the beginning highlight and exaggerate the aspect of independence of this individual. And to a degree that even leads to a kind of a fragmentation of society. A society is made up of so many points, but all organized in a rigid structure. And there are others which from the beginning highlight a constant give and take, where your individuality is a fluid center of a larger, more rigid social body. And you can see how the whole line of thinking and way of working and the values would be so different, but both important. So this would give you a sense of the building of mind. And into this you can add many variations of lines of interest. A mind that works towards development of music, a mind that works towards development of relationships, a mind that works towards abstract knowledge, would be completely different forms. And then the third facet, which is the same formed capacity of energy. How do your energies flow? Again, you can have an introverted energy or extroverted energy, an energy which is driven to conquering, overcoming challenges, an energy which is connecting with people, building harmonious structures, an energy which is serving rather than dominating. But it could still be an intense energy as it serves. And we have very interesting examples of people who, in the very way they serve and help others, become leaders. And we may call them servant leaders, which sounds like a contradiction of terms, but is one of the forms in which you can be very effective if that's the line of your energetic working. How much can the physical personality contain of the energy is often a limitation. There are cases where the inner being comes with a huge force of energy which has been worked upon, but the physical biology is unable to contain it. It tends to become either restless or unstable or even breaks down from ill health because of this inability to contain. And all of these are part of the struggle of the inner and outer. So, if there is a need of a lifetime where some work was left incomplete, then a repetition of one of these three or all of these three facets would become useful. Otherwise, it is pointless. What is interesting to notice from this background, Sri Aurobindo gives us such profound insights, and we have to take time to see how they apply in the evidence of the life that we have. We find that in almost all cases where there is a clear recollection of past life, including elements of personality, in almost all of these cases, that previous life ended suddenly with an accident or an unintended death. So the child, now newborn, suddenly says, my name is not so and so, it is something else. I belong to such and such village, my actual parents are so and so. It tells the names. And there are many examples like this. More than 2,000 scientifically documented examples exist already. It's a huge body of knowledge, demonstrating a child has no means of having access to any such information, even speaking a new language. He's taken then to that village which he claims to be his. He recognizes the previous parents or brothers, sisters, children, recognizes objects and chastises them for not keeping things correctly and so on. Very specific knowledge. And then you observe the person died because there was a conflict in the family, someone shot him, and the traumatic passage suddenly ending what would be a development that the soul wanted. Now the soul needs to replicate and complete that process which was left incomplete. And so it keeps large parts of that personality, similar formation, and even the memories, because it took birth almost immediately after. In most cases of such real accidental deaths, there is a birth which takes place very quickly and often carrying such elements. But in all other cases where there is a healthy transition, the work is done. The soul takes a longer time to withdraw, to absorb, assimilate the life, and builds a completely new framework of personality for the new direction of its evolution. This point of choice, interestingly, is often at the time of death in the previous life. So, momentarily the soul turns to look back at all that was done, and there is as if a flash in which all the significant events of life are seen in a fraction of a moment. Now, these are descriptions you will find in people who have had near-death experiences. The person is driving a car, there's an accident, and at the moment of the accident, the person recalls there was a flash in which all the events of his life appeared. Now imagine what that means. The accident is happening in physical time, the collision has taken place, the shock is hitting the physical body. Suddenly, in a slice of time which is fine, narrow, you have the flashback of all these events. Now this is not possible in the physical mind. It's not even possible easily on the inner mind, which would still have something. It's possible in the soul's memory. It is as if the soul comes forward momentarily because it knows it has a choice. All that it has built up of significance is there in a single instant, not a sequence. in a single instant, simultaneously. And at that moment, the choice comes forward from the soul, no, there is still something left to be done. And then the collision, the shock, the damage, the person survives, recovers, although technically he may have died, he is revived and comes back, but with retaining this memory. And inevitably the personality is fundamentally changed because of the strong imprint of the soul's emergence. Or, at that moment when the soul is about to leave this body, it looks back, and now it's a transition which is smooth, natural. And then having looked back, the most obvious thing to happen is, what does it feel lacking now? And it turns in awareness towards that which needs to be done, the thing missing, the thing which would make complete this already partial completion. And it turns towards that and says, this is what I want to experience. So Sri Aurobindo gives this example of a king who has had a life of completeness, no lack, no limitation, no struggle to survive or overcome for personal sake. Maybe there's a larger struggle. And so as it turns away from this, but what is it like to have nothing and to overcome at every step of life? And the soul feels drawn to this and says, this is what I want to experience now. And this moment decides the stream of the next development. And as the soul withdraws subsequently, not only to assimilate this immediate previous life, it is assimilating in a way as to order things of experience in preparation for the new. That's why the choice has to be made before the assimilative process begins, because the assimilation itself arranges and forms the broad framework of the new personality and direction of life, which then it turns to when it is ready for rebirth and takes on a personality, infusing that frame, the cadre of self and turn of mind and energy into the new personality. So we understand here why a soul might want to take a similar cadre, turn of mind or drive of energy, because something is left incomplete. Otherwise, if it is completed, it will want a new formation of personality. So Sri Aurobindo continues, but normally this would be quite otiose, absolutely unnecessary, pointless. The soul that has been John Smith cannot gain anything or fulfill itself by remaining John Smith forever. It cannot achieve growth or perfection by repeating the same character, interests, occupations, types of inner and outer movements forever. Our life and rebirth would be always the same recurring decimal. He gives the example of a number. If you divide 1 by 3, you have 0.33333333, pointless. There's actually a deeper suggestion in this. It'll get a little mathematical, but stay with me, it's worthwhile. If you take another, what's an approximation of pi? It's 21 divided by 7, 3.14156, and I think it repeats. Any decimal that you create of a number divided by another number will have something, a pattern, which inevitably will repeat after a point. You can create complex relationships between two numbers, and the portion that will repeat maybe 3 digits, maybe 10 digits, maybe 100 digits, maybe 1,000 digits, maybe 1,000,000 digits, but after 1,000,000 digits which are distinct, it will repeat itself, interestingly. Is there a number in which digits never repeat themselves?
Pi.
Pi is such a number, or E. These are called transcendental numbers. Why? They transcend representation in physical relationships. You cannot build them by putting one number divided by another number. Pi cannot be represented by 1 divided by another number. And yet it is there everywhere. Draw a perfect circle, divide its perimeter by the diameter, you have pi. And the nature of pi is the number never repeats. never repeats. You can go on and unendingly, it will never repeat. Such is the nature of the soul. The suggestion in this is that the soul is not a construct of relationships of things. It is something which is innately transcending all representation. It is like pie entering the physical world trying to express itself, and it expresses through the perfect form of the perfect circle, but it can be never captured through numerical means. It can never be built out of a composition of many separate elements. It is always unique and uniquely expresses itself. So this suggestion comes in Sri Aurobindo's vocabulary when he says, our life and rebirth would be always the same recurring decimal, and it's not. That's the point. It would be not an evolution, but the meaningless continuity of an eternal repetition. Our attachment to our present personality demands such a continuity, such a repetition. We want as if I want to take birth, or I think I will take birth again. John Smith wants to be John Smith forever, but the demand is obviously ignorant. And if it were satisfied, that would be a frustration, not a fulfillment. You will see in many examples of novels, fiction, cinema, they play with possibilities of life unendingly extended. One of the forms which is often it is offered is somebody in the vampire type of idea, that somebody is somehow stuck in a body and a personality and can never die. Or some miraculous scientific invention which now makes you permanent in your physical body. And inevitably, in the exploration of these possibilities, one comes to the conclusion that the person eventually suffocates. I'm tired of being myself. I'm tired of this life. I wish there was a way of release or escape. It's an interesting idea. If you were to be stuck like this forever, you would simply say, enough. I want to break free of this narrowness and limitation. And so that's the point here. It would be frustration, not a fulfillment. It is only by a change of outer self, a constant progression of the nature, a growth in the spirit, that we can justify our existence. That is, you continue to exist, and the existence is meaningful if you have these. Now here again he has used three phrases. A change of outer self. You will notice in your own life there are transitional points where suddenly all that you were becomes so pointless or becomes such a barrier to further growth. Something comes and shatters it by an external blow, or within you there is a breaking out and complete reshaping of your personality. So this is the first character, change of outer self. Second, constant progression of the nature. If you do not have the ability to continue to grow, at some point you get stuck, you find it frustrating, suffocating. But if somehow you could break through that limitation and continue to grow, you'd find it fulfilling. But if you continue to grow, a few years down, a few decades down, you'd be a completely different person anyway. So, and the third, a growth in the spirit. This is the inner growth. Externally, I may do all the kinds of growths of novelty of experience that I want, but if I remain the same internally, then again one feels blocked, frustrated. And so the growth in the spirit, constant progression of the nature, and change of outer self. Now if you put it in into-out relationship, the whole picture changes. If there is growth of the spirit, automatically there will be constant progression of nature and there will be a change of outer self. But if you start from outside in and continue to change outer self, it's not enough to cause the growth of the spirit. Or just sustaining growth of this, it's not enough to sustain progression of nature. And just progression of nature would not be enough to sustain growth of the spirit. And so when we make an effort in our life, if we can prioritize the inner growth of the spirit, the other two will follow inevitably. And especially for those of us who have a clear spiritual purpose and focus in life, this becomes the priority. And yes, continue to change all the things you want externally in the progression of your nature or change of your outer self, but make this the basis, the rest will follow. If this is neglected, eventually you will still find yourself stuck and suffocating. The mother's observation that when you suddenly find life has become boring, meaningless, you are in a passage of dryness, as if in a desert, everything has become a hollow shell, well, that's because you have lost contact with the inner being, with the soul or the divine presence. Bring back that contact and suddenly the juice will fill all of life, because all the rest of the processes of growth will begin. Now, the implication of this, though, for the soul's rebirth is enormous. In principle, it means if somehow these three changes can continue, then you don't need to take a new birth. You could continue the same personality, except it won't be the same personality. The personality itself will be growing. And so this gives us a hint of the relationship of the soul's growth and the personality. And we'll see now what he says next. Personality is only a temporary mental, vital, physical formation which the being, the real person, the psychic entity puts forward on the surface. It is not the self in its abiding reality. So now first step of that relationship is this. There is the real person, capital P, the psychic entity. And then there are the three layers, mental, vital, physical. And this real person puts forward on the surface the temporary formations on these three levels. But when the person comes back into its rest, its lasting character, the abiding reality, it is this inner real person, the psychic entity, which is the real you. The layers of formation have been put forward as if imprinted on substance which is not it. And therefore the analogy of clothing becomes obvious. You have inner wear. Wear a banian inside. Upon that you have a clothing of your normal shirt which perhaps you reveal to people. The inner acts as a protective layer within. And then upon that you put a third layer of a coat or a thick pullover or sweater to protect from the cold. This third layer is the most rigid, required for protection. The second layer is more expressive of you, and the inner is left at a deeper personal level which, well, you don't express, but it is always supporting from behind, not seen by others, obviously. And they are like clothing, layers put upon. And in each, there is an imprint, a formation put forward on the surface. Now this idea is very important. From within, there is the putting forward onto these three layers. The immediate suggestion is, when the soul enters the body, it brings with it already a certain formation or a tendency which it puts into these or imprints into these. Now, how far this goes depends on the maturity of the soul. A less mature soul will simply carry whatever is developed in it, step into the physical body, and whatever it brings somehow imprints automatically and forms a certain frame. A more mature soul may preside over that process consciously at an earlier stage, even before birth. May preside over the formation and development of the fetus, infusing in it certain tendencies and giving it a certain direction, even to the extent of shaping its form. And in such cases, the child will be born with an appearance quite distinct from its parents. We may see elements of resemblance, and yet there will be something quite distinct. But much more than the physical imprint is the mental and vital imprints, the mind and energy imprints of its nature, which it infuses even at that early stage, which can change the physical form again. If you make the body capable of holding larger quantum of energy, well, the body form and process will suitably have to be reshaped or will get reshaped inevitably. And the child from birth, you will discover, has an unusual character of vitality or an unusual curiosity or whatever form it takes, and a direction to it. And parents often comment, when the child is much older, maybe in teenage or even in late adulthood, the parents will say, these tendencies we saw in the child even while he or she was in the cradle. Interesting. The way the child kicks its arms and legs, or calls or demands from its parents to be serviced. I am hungry, I demand that you service me now. You see that vital force that demands and is upset if you do not immediately obey is an imprint of character which is already there in a body which is unable to express it other than in this manner. Or the vitality may be very quiet and still, and it feels a need, it feels discomfort, it makes some noises and it waits patiently for the parents to come. And this particular turn of nature was already set and was set by the general turn of the soul's intention and stays through most of the life. The mind, as it responds, you ring a bell or wave something nice, make faces, move your fingers before the child, it laughs and smiles. Or another child expresses some distress. That shows already a direction of development. Or it is curious, it reaches out, studies, and you can see it's trying to think. And again, that sets a direction which you can see there that will define the turn of the whole of the life. And so it's interesting how that initial infusion that the soul brings actually stays as the base for the whole journey and can be recognized at that point. So the psychic entity puts forward on the surface. So from the experience of the soul, these are surface layers. Itself is in the depth, covered in these. In each return to earth, the person, the Purusha, makes a new formation, builds a new personal quantum suitable for a new experience, for a new growth of its being. Quantum, specific measure, quantity, cut out. And the suggestion here, which has massive implications, that in the personality, in the person, in the totality of the person, which has built up, let's say, over hundreds of lives or thousands of lives, so many facets, it doesn't put it all in front. It selects a quantum of this to put forward for this life experience. Now, it may have, for example, been through a lifetime of a genius level performance of music on a particular instrument. That ability inherently, the essence of that ability is part of the soul experience. But it may not bring it forward at all in this lifetime. Or it may bring forward only as much of it as is necessary for the harmonization of that musical artistry into the mind's rational development. And just that much. And so what will happen in this personality as the child grows? It will briefly demonstrate unusual skill or comfort with music and a musical intelligence, but it will not be interested in developing it. Parents may say, oh, you should be a musician. And the child says, no, but I like that more. And some element of that brief exposure will remain always as a supporting artistic nuance or subtlety of mind in that new development, which may be of a completely different kind of life. But there's a choice of what quantum of the richness of what is developed is actually put forward for this personality. Now you can see how much more complex the actual experience is for the soul. So he says, in each return to earth, the person, the Purusha, capital P, makes a new formation. Complete fresh, here's a formation. From what? Builds a new personal quantum suitable for a new experience. And then, of course, for a new growth of its being. Who's going to grow? Not the personality and the framework put forward, itself as the person who's going to grow. And this is the framework it chooses. Now, literally, as an analogy, as an image, you can see formulated this way. Look at a point that can look in all directions because it's a point, and it puts forward a little square or a rectangle. This will be my viewpoint through which I will meet the full universe. Like a cinema, when you are trained for camera work, they say, learn to look at the universe through this cadre, this frame. And you see how different it is when you see a little piece and move the piece around. And that's going to be the lens through which you're going to experience the world. Notice also, as the soul grows, that lens may widen. It will still have a shape, form, direction, but it may become broad enough that it can take in much more, which will be a whole different experience. And there'll be lives for expansion, there'll be lives for specialization, and there'll be lives for integration. Then, when it passes from its body, it keeps still the same vital and mental form for a time. But the forms or sheaths dissolve, and what is kept is only the essential elements of the past quantum, of which some will, but some may not be used in the next incarnation. Now what happens when you have completed this? You have just shed the gross physical body, you have still perhaps some imprint of the subtle physical body, which is also rapidly dissolving. You have the vital and mental bodies, which are still there for a while until they begin to also dissolve. So the practical experience at the time of separation is, okay, my gross body has fallen, but I am still the same John Smith personality. And then afterwards it's as if, this narrow aspect of my John Smith emotional frame is now beginning to thin out. I feel myself released, widening, freed up. That tendency to be obsessed with certain things begins to dissolve. My mind suddenly feels released and widened, as if it was compressed and now it's decompressed. The nature of the exact experience varies according to the type of personality, but still the sense of release as these rigidifying components fall away. What remains? Even the specifics of experience will fade out. The names, the kinds of food you were attached to, have relevance only at the physical vital consciousness. In the mental body, the sense of wanting pure food, the sense of eating as a sacred experience, that will remain. But the moment you have shed the physical and vital, the particular attachment to food types is gone. What remains is these deeper values, if at all they had any role in this particular life. If you have spent a whole life in struggle, the sense of conquest, the sense of overcoming, the sense that whatever the challenge life throws, I have the capacity to overcome. I can draw out from myself that strength. That remains as a capacity, as an imprint. And so the sheaths dissolve, the forms dissolve, the essential elements of the past quantum remain, of which some will be used in the next incarnation, but some may not be used. So I've developed all this. How much is useful? Much of it may go back into my repository of the overall growth, but some parts now, yes, this is relevant. It's interesting often when you look at the way the soul chooses the new formation of life, it draws little pieces from other lives. Little pieces which may have suddenly no obvious relationship to this personality. But when you look at the nature of the consciousness, you see a connection. So in one life, a soul has spent time developing a relationship with the energies within crystals as part of some training in the energetic or occult realm. And then it's gone. Many lives later, suddenly there is this as if link of that touch that comes in. And in this new personality, the person has an unusual liking for collecting beautiful crystals which have a pure energy quality. It has no other function in the life, it's just there. If you think about it, what the soul has retained or brought forward or has come forward spontaneously is something of that connection with material nature and the sense of the pure material energy represented in the beauty of the crystalline form And it relates to the nature of the work done for this life in matter, where it wants to bring some higher ideals into matter, and somehow this as a resonance from that life remains. You're no more engaging with the energies of the crystals, just the beauty and purity that they radiate, because it's relevant for this. And you take that away, nothing of the work changes. It just happens to be a tiny flicker of that connection. And so when one actually ends up looking back at all the past lives and their relationship, there are these such interesting little nuances which pop up, adding to the richness and reminding you that all this special focus of this life has behind it so much more and will lead to so much more. The essential form of the past personality may remain as one element among many. One personality among many personalities of the same person, but in the background, in the subliminal, behind the veil of the surface mind, life and body, contributing from there whatever is needed of itself to the new formation. Now literally that means behind the veil there are so many facets of personality of all the lives that we have had and the essential imprints of those, of which elements might reflect or be drawn out as needed for a purpose. At some point in the early stages of the ashram, the mother often narrated who a person was in a previous lifetime. One of them, I believe it was Bansidhar, who was a General Mora. I don't know who that is, but who was in the French Revolution, perhaps some name. And when he came to know, he had great distress. Oh, I was responsible for so many deaths. Now that's the personality identifying wrongly. But what was there in his character? A certain heroism. You went to him for something quite casual. Look, the life in the ashram had nothing of the need for that giant, general-like fighting character. It was a very simple, sedate, monotonous life even in some ways. But you went to him and you'd say, "What? You are like this? No, this is not good. You must be strong. You must be courageous." And suddenly you felt this vitality, and that was that element of that life or that personality which came. I remember somebody went, he had problem with his child who was not obeying him. And they asked his advice, what to do. She's not obeying. We are trying to get her into a good, healthy lifestyle. No, she's not obeying. You should not interfere with her. What if she runs away from your house? Problem solved. The parents were silent. That's it. They never raised the issue again. But that force and that vitality, that dramatic leadership of the general, it was there in his personality. And there was no obvious scope for its development in the ashram life, but it was there. If you begin to look at a person and begin to look at these facets of personality and see from where they come, it is a fascinating exercise. And just shows you how rich this whole process of rebirth is. And how much more complex than our very simplistic idea, oh, this soul pops in and takes on a new personality. No, there's a very rich interplay. Many personalities in the background behind the veil. But contributing from there whatever is needed of itself to the new formation. But it will not itself be the whole formation or build anew the old unchanged type of nature. It may even be that the new quantum or structure of being will exhibit a quite contrary character and temperament, quite different capacities under other very different tendencies. So even a contrary type of personality may appear, from the dominating leadership to the completely serviced, joyous, loving, caring, self-abnegation of personality. Both are possible. For latent potentials may be ready to emerge, but something already in action but inchoate may have been held back in the last life which needed to be worked out, but was kept over for a later and more suitable combination of the possibilities of the nature. Now here you see the full complexity now emerging. There are things which were developed earlier, but couldn't be developed fully. They were left pending. And now in this lifetime, those elements are brought forward. From another lifetime, something else developed to the maximum it could then, and waiting for this opportunity now to come forward in a more complex, technological rich environment. You can literally through one screen connect to the whole earth. And there were so many possibilities we have built up of a sense of universality, which at that time reached the full possibility available then of human experience, now suddenly coming forward and appreciating a more rich expression of universality, while other elements of personality are still developing for a different goal. All the past is indeed there, with its accelerated impetus and potentialities for the formation of the future. But all of it is not ostensibly present and active. It's all there waiting. And even it is possible, if a situation so demands, you go within and draw out an aspect which has never been expressed in this life, but which was built earlier, which comes to assist in this breakthrough and then retires, its work done. The greater the variety of formations that have existed in the past and can be utilized, the more rich and multitudinous the accumulated buildings of experience, the more their essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, manifold response to the universe can be brought forward and harmonized in the new birth. The more numerous the veiled personalities, mental, vital, subtle, physical, that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface, the greater and more opulent will be that personality, and the nearer to the possible transition out of the completed mental stage of evolution to something beyond it. So now we have come to the crux of this, which we will be taking up next Sunday. But what he's showing you is all that rich complexity, the greater it is, the more we are ready here for the next step in evolution out of the human mind into something greater. And it's the reason why this life, for most of us, involves often a bringing forward of many facets of personality and integrating them in order to prepare precisely for this great leap beyond the completed mental stage of evolution to something beyond it. But all of this requires within a strong center which can hold the full richness and complexity and harmonize it and integrate it for that step forward. And this is what he describes in the rest of the paragraph, and which we will take up next Sunday. And we will begin the next class at 6 p.m. The Friday classes continue at 5 p.m. And this will lead us to what is required and how we may in this life prepare ourselves for a conscious transition into the next birth, keeping the full benefit of the acquired personality and experience, keeping the center of the spiritual impulse and all this rich complexity of development, and continue consciously into the new body so that we may extend effectively the life's effort into those. I give to this a special value for those of us who are here, who have had this contact with the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, whether in physical body or in an inner spiritual consciousness. Having had that contact, having had that blessing, what we have received now is so precious. It will be a pity to have to lose it and to restart in a new body and a new personality. A special force and impetus that is gifted by them is with us, intimately aligned with the soul, and will help us to make that step And this study will help us to prepare ourselves spiritually and psychologically for this. For those who came in later, this is the chapter titled Rebirth and Other Worlds, of which we are reading the last, let's say, 5 paragraphs or 6 paragraphs. We can meditate on this for a few minutes.